There are fears that this move could backfire and remove potentially an opportunity to stop young people becoming radicalised. Our guest tonight is Sheikh Wessam Shakawi. As a part of the school chaplaincy program, he has first-hand experience of high school students who might be being drawn towards more extreme beliefs. Sheikh Wessam, welcome back to The Drum.
Thank you very much.
First of all, what are your concerns about this? We haven't got a lot of detail as to how this is actually going to be done. It sounds like it's going to be the principals effectively reporting back, saying what kind of prayers or activities are happening at your school.
Well, first and foremost, I'd like to say that there's no direct link between prayer groups and somebody expressing their own views. I mean, for example, if there's a bully in the courtyard and he has an affiliation with a group outside the school, having an audit serves no purpose. And there's never been any assertion whatsoever that people externally have come into the school and preached anything but a curriculum that's been transparent for everyone to see. The community, there's a body within the Islamic community that has been operating for nearly 30 years, and there's never been an issue with that. So having religion being taught in school is never the problem. But if somebody advocates or expresses their own personal view, this really, the onus is put back on the school in terms of what their policies and procedures are about. And I think that's very important to draw a distinction between the two.
So what can you do if you're going into a school and you're talking to a group of students, but then those students, they form social bonds, they're meeting up during their lunch break, and maybe one of them has got some kind of out there ideas that he's then spreading. How do you, as their chaplain, in a formal sense, how do you have any impact on that?
Look, I think the dangerous thing is to shut down the conversation. You're talking about young men who already feel isolated and besieged in the community. And so to shut down that conversation, I think, would be counterintuitive. I think the conversation needs to be had, and there needs to be some space where they can talk about it. These are world events, and they're not blind to what's happening and what's in the media every single day. And so these conversations need to be had, and there are positive outcomes that ensue from those conversations that are had. And so I think it's important that we have to be mindful here. Yes, we're diligent, and we have to be diligent, but we can't create this thing where we shut down the conversation. And what that will do eventually, ultimately, is you basically, if nobody's having the conversation, how do people, preachers in the community, counter the narrative of what extremist groups are trying to advocate? And that becomes very, very difficult. So the conversation definitely needs to be had. And even if it's had, in schools, amongst mentors, they need to speak to their mentors, they need to speak to their teachers and their social workers and their teachers. But obviously when they go off together and they have the conversation, that becomes their own, it's their thinking. And so they're thinking out loud amongst each other. But as my job and what the teacher's job is, that's something altogether. I think we can't confuse the two.
At what point, Sheikh, do you draw a distinction between what is the free flow of ideas and, sometimes young people have some pretty crazy ideas? At what point do they become dangerous to the extent that you say, you shouldn't be talking about this? You shouldn't be, for instance, going into the schoolyard and telling your friends, I've been reading up about Islamic State and I believe in a lot of what they're doing. I might even go over there and maybe you guys should come too. At what point do you say, stop that, that's not appropriate, you can't do that?
Well, ultimately, I think what will be a factor and a determining point is if the question either A, falls on deaf ears or the question goes unanswered, thereby you allow a gap where others fill it. And so you don't want to leave questions unanswered where you just simply shut down the conversation. So if there's a situation where it may be a young student is advocating something that entails violent extremism, whatever the case may be, then it does need to go to another level where other people are involved, such as the Islamic leadership, who are intricately involved. And I can tell you there is a strong relationship between the Islamic leadership and government in terms of working with schools. I work with other various schools, and we go out from places to places, and we actually speak to these young men and students in the schools. And so this is happening already. It's something that is already active and very, very positive, and the outcome is fantastic.
Yeah, and Paul, what's your sense on this? Is this audit, is this something that is even required? It seems in the case of the Epping Boys incident, the principal dealt with it, the parents said we liked the way that he dealt with it. Do we really need the government getting involved at this point?
No, I don't get this at all. It's another nanny state overreaction. I don't see what does the audit achieve? I mean, it just bureaucratises an organic process that we've already heard is long-standing, ongoing, when sensible people get whiff of something insensible, then they have to have relationships. They don't need bureaucrats coming in. I do not get this at all.
Yeah, Holly, is there a concern in philosophically having the government of the day potentially saying what you can and can't talk about at school, particularly when it comes to an issue such as faith and belief?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that goes to the whole notion of separation in church and state and wanting to ensure that, people are free to explore those topics, to develop their understanding without control around you should believe this, you should believe that. And I think I'd agree with the points made earlier. I think it's really important that there's the schools, the community groups, that's led by them, that feedback, that process is controlled by the groups that are seeking to deliver them and to see the students engage with them. And I think the interesting thing about the government getting involved at this point is we really don't understand, A, how this audit's going to roll out, and secondly, what the end game is. I mean, what are we throwing the resources at and hoping to have as the end product?
Sheikh West, I mean, in terms of that separation of church and state or faith and state, is there an argument that says, how about we just get religion out of schools altogether and you can deal with these issues at your church or your synagogue or your mosque, your temple, wherever it is, but frankly, this is not something that we should be having prayer groups in schools. It's not the place for it.
Look, I don't believe teaching religion in schools is the problem. And, there's no evidence whatsoever that teaching religion in schools has led to violent extremism in any way, shape or form. So there's no evidence of that whatsoever. And it's not practical because you're talking about an issue that's central to one's identity. So how you would practically have that, it would be very, very difficult. Ultimately, at the end of the day, this whole thing is perceived as targeting the Muslims. That's how they perceive it. The community is already asking the questions, will other faith groups be targeted as well? And the questions already today have been continual and ongoing. It just feels like a targeted thing, and everything will come under scrutiny. Everything will be analysed. And once you open the door to this, it's almost like a more of the same, and it just keeps happening over and over and over. I understand there has to be due diligence. I absolutely understand that. But I just think knee-jerk reactions aren't the way. A one-sided or one-faceted approach is not the way to tackle this issue.
Lenore, you've got a pretty good detector when it comes to seeing when a politician is going out there with an announcement before perhaps the detail of the policy has been thought through. There's not a lot of detail around what this audit will actually do and where it will lead to. Is that a concern?
Well, I listened to Mike Baird today and I can't quite work out what precisely is that the audit is looking for, what's being audited, or what should happen when whatever it is found. I agree that these conversations should happen in schools and happen freely. I do think if someone sees something dangerous going on or possibly dangerous, that should be reported. But I would hope that schools already had a process to do that. I mean, I just feel like the detail is so light on, it's almost impossible to discuss it. I don't know what they're talking about.
Sheikh Westham, do you get a sense that this is a problem that is getting worse by drawing attention to it? Is it creating in some way kind of a perverse incentive for boys to be boys and to talk tough and to it becomes self-perpetuating in a way?
Look, ultimately, there are young boys and young students who will talk about issues and people are inquisitive and they want to ask about things that are occurring. But all of that is completely on the outside. It's nothing is believed, and nothing stems from within. It's all something that is happening from day-to-day life, and they want to ask about and they want to inquire about, and they make those inquiries, and that should definitely not be shunned aside.
Our focus has been largely, we're talking and perhaps thinking about young men, because often young men who we see are being radicalised. But what about the young women? Where do they fit into this process?
Well, again, there are active women and female groups out there in the community who also speak to young females. There are active programs that we have currently who work in female schools as well. So, I mean, it's a faceted approach, but that attacks basically, all the young men, young women in every regard. It's not something that that is left basically without being addressed and informed about.